So I'm back in the car. I've left North Carolina and now I've started on my second road trip here in the US. It's taken me first to Washington, D.C., where I'm spending a few days, then up to Philadelphia. Maybe I'll go through Atlantic City as well, and then I'll end the road trip with 4 or 5 days in and around Manhattan in New York.
Meet Palle Bo, a digital nomad from Denmark on an epic journey around the world.
My name is Palle Bo, and I'm a long-time radio producer. In 2013, I started planning to become a digital nomad and a full-time traveler. 3 years later, I had sold my house, my car, and all my furniture. And in July 2016, I set out on a quest to visit every country in the world. In this podcast, I'm taking you along on my journey.
This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
But on my way to Washington, D.C., I took a small detour because I wanted to see Charlottesville, a small city in the U.S. where they had the, almost riots with the neo-Nazi demonstrations against the removal of the statues of Robert E. Lee and other Confederate figures. So I wanted to see, the most controversial statue in the world right now. And on my way into Charlottesville, I could see that the nature is so beautiful here. I was driving through a forest and it's totally beautiful. And now as I'm driving out of Charlottesville, it's the same very beautiful scenic road. Also, Charlottesville itself, it's a wonderful, nice little city. A lot of restaurants and a lot of small, quirky shops. It's a very nice place. And then I came to the statue. I wanted to see the statue of Robert E. Lee on a horse. And it's covered in plastic. My guess is that instead of deciding on whether to remove it or not, they covered it in plastic. So it's still there, but it's not visible. So I almost got to see the most controversial statue in the world. But this episode is going to be about Washington, D.C., the capital of the U.S., and I'll be there in a few hours. My name is Palle Bo, and this is the Radio Vagabond podcast. This episode is brought to you in part by Hotels25.com. It's a website that helps you find the best prices on hotels and guest houses around the world. Hotels25.com, best price guaranteed.
It's Sunday morning and I've had an early start. Right now I'm in front of the Capitol building, or rather behind the Capitol building in what they call the Mall. It's a park that is behind the Capitol building. It's a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky, and this huge iconic Capitol building right beside me. It's quite unique. Today I plan to just wander around in this area, maybe go in to see 1 or 2 museums. There are so many museums here in DC, and a lot of them are actually free. So there's a lot to see, and I have 3 days here in Washington, DC. When I said that a lot of people were running, there's even more here. It seems as if there's a marathon or some kind of race going on today, and that explains also why a lot of the streets here in downtown Washington, D.C. has been blocked by police, and apparently there's some kind of race going on. But that wasn't what I was talking about before. There were a lot of joggers before, not part of the race. Right now I'm in front of the Newseum with an N. The sign says the Newseum celebrates our First Amendment freedoms. It is a museum that talks about the press and what the press and the news means to our society. I wonder if there's a lot of fake news in there.
museum is designed for you to start your tour where you are now, the concourse level. Then take the glass elevators to the top, the 6th floor, and work your way down. Here's what you don't want to miss on each floor.
So now I've seen the first of hopefully many museums here in Washington, D.C. It was the Newseum, and it was very interesting. It told why freedom of speech is such an important thing, and that is right up my alley. I've been working with an organization that helps freedom of speech, so that's something I'm totally for, obviously. And I had got a ticket that will allow me to come back. And that's good because on the ground floor, which is where we finished the tour, there's an exhibition with Pulitzer Prize photographs, and that was interesting. But I needed to rush through because I have an appointment with a local tour guide. His name is Rob, and he's supposed to show up in a second. You are listening to the Radio Vagabond podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave a review in iTunes. If you're listening on an iPhone, you can actually do it right there within your podcast app. And now, back to the show.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So how are you liking DC so far? You've only been here for less than a day, so hard to judge.
It's funny to actually be here because it's so iconic, and all of a sudden you're in front of buildings you've seen a million times on TV.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
Okay, cool. So if you want to walk on the National Mall, we can go over here. There's a festival happening over here. It's a little loud, but over here it should be good.
There was some kind of race this morning. What was it? It was not a marathon. It was more like
10K, 5K. Yeah, so September and October, every Saturday and Sunday morning in DC, there are marathons, races.
Every Saturday? Wow.
Yeah, so it's if you need to drive, it's actually kind of a burden, especially the marathons, which close down over 20 miles. So
tell me who you are and what you do.
So my name is Rob. I'm a tour guide. I run a tour company called Trip Hacks DC. And I also do social media, YouTube, tips, tricks, hacks for exploring the city.
Yeah, that's how I found you. I found your YouTube channel, and you gave some good trips and some good hacks, so I thought I'd reach out to you.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. You know, the YouTube channel is really just me giving all my best advice, and then my main business, of course, is actually giving tours. So people who are coming to town and they want to, have me show them around, I'm happy to take them around.
Are you born and raised here?
No, I was born and raised in Ohio, which is another one of our 50 states, and I've been in Washington, D.C. for about 7 years now.
And so you managed to become sort of an expert on it. How did that happen?
Well, I have been a tour guide for 5 years, and just being a tour guide, you have to know a lot about the city because people are always asking you, what's a good place to eat, what's a good area to stay. And so just by, discovering these things over the years, I've just amassed a knowledge of the city that I can now share back with everybody.
So we're headed towards, we're standing right beside a fountain right now. That's the noise in the background. We're heading into the mall.
That's right, yeah. So we're actually about to head into the National Mall, and it's best known for being the big urban park right in the middle of Washington, D.C., where you will come when you go to see our free Smithsonian museums, the National Gallery of Art, and if you tour the monuments and memorials, you'll be down here as well.
Is that where they're talking about crowd sizes in January?
Yep, so the inauguration is held on the west front of the U.S. Capitol, and they basically have the entire National Mall for crowds who want to come, people who want to come and see it in person. They spread out from basically the Capitol down to the Washington Monument on the other end.
And there are so many museums here.
Yeah, so without a doubt, one of the best things about Washington, D.C. is that there are a ton of museums, but a lot of major cities have a lot of museums. We have an incredible amount of completely free museums, and that's not something that you're going to necessarily find all over the world. If you travel around Europe, you know that there are certainly some wonderful free museums in some places, but you're not going to walk into the Louvre for free, or some of the other big ones. So it's very unique to have so many museums all in one place that are amazing museums, and you don't have to pay a penny to visit.
I'm a little bit confused on where to go and what to, because I can't do everything.
Yeah, the museums are huge. That's one thing that a lot of people don't quite appreciate until they're actually physically inside, is that a lot of these museums are absolutely massive. And you could, if you were a history buff or you were an art lover, you could spend an entire day in a single museum. Actually, the museum you just came from, the Newseum, your ticket's good for 2 consecutive days, because they actually think that you need 2 days to really see everything if you were going to see it all.
Yeah. So actually, you could actually almost spend a month in DC just walking from museum to museum.
Absolutely. You might get bored after a while of
get a
just going to
museum fatigue.
Museum fatigue is a very real thing, and that's a tip that I often give people is, when you come, if you're coming for a week, you probably don't want to plan to see 2 museums every single day, because you're going to get fatigue and you're going to enjoy them less than you would have if you were going in fresh. So I usually recommend that people look in advance, look up the museums that we have. There's the Smithsonian museums, which are the best known, and then we also have the National Gallery of Art.
The Smithsonian, they have several museums.
Yeah, the Smithsonian is the government agency that runs many museums, mostly around the National Mall in Washington, D.C., but there are a few other Smithsonian museums located around town as well, and then affiliate museums all around the country.
And I can take anything you can throw at me, and nothing can get me down. Life is looking so bright, the sun is up again. I'm feeling like I could fly. No clouds in my way, no. And I'm living the good life. And I'm living the good life now. I'm living the good life, and nothing can get me down, no.
So this area we're now officially on the National Mall.
Yeah.
It goes from the Capitol down at that end, and it ends at the Washington Monument down at that end.
Yeah.
On the other side of the Washington Monument, we have our other monuments and memorials, the Lincoln Memorial, World War II Memorial, and colloquially, most people still refer to that as the National Mall, even though officially it does end up here at the Washington Monument.
And it's a Sunday. It's around 12:30 now, and an ice cream truck beside us, and being a sunny Sunday, there are, I think, 7 million people right here.
So weekends are always busy on the National Mall. I usually recommend that if you can swing it, to come down here on a weekday when it's a little less busy. But Saturdays and Sundays are definitely very busy over here. And in the Washington Post, every day they give the weather a score, on a 1 to 10 scale, and they declared that today is a 10 out of 10 beautiful fall day.
Wow.
So weather-wise, you can't get any better than this.
Whoa, I'm living the good life. Whoa, I'm living the good life now. Whoa, I'm living the good life, and nothing can get me down.
Tell me about your company. Is it a one-man band, or do you have a big staff? Or
Right now, it's a one-man band. I've been a tour guide for 5 years. I've done tours for companies, and just this year I started my own. So right now it's just me, but what I specialize in is small group private tours. So that means that if you're a family of 4 or you're a small group of 10, you can book a tour with me, pay one flat price, and there won't be anyone else in your tour group. So most tours that you'll find, you pay per person, and then you get put in a group of up to 15, 20 people, and it's you and some other people you don't know. So those can be great if you want to meet some new people, make friends. But on the other hand, you kind of have to go at the pace of the group, and a lot of those groups can only move as quickly as the slowest person. So with mine, if you want to go fast and see everything and see a lot of stuff, we'll do that. If you want to really take your time and move a little bit more slowly, I'm happy to accommodate that as well.
So is it the same places you go every time, or does that depend on the group?
Most groups want to see the monuments memorials. That's definitely the top seller. So 9 out of 10 tours that I give are of the monuments memorials. But every once in a while, somebody will contact me and they'll say, I want to see Capitol Hill, or I want to take a tour of Georgetown, and I'm happy to accommodate those as well. But for the most part, people do want to take a walk around the monuments memorials.
Well, we have a fantastic view of the Capitol here. Let me just take a picture.
Sure.
You're listening to the Radio Vagabond podcast. Before we continue, I'd like to remind you that I would be so thrilled if you shared it on Facebook or Twitter.
So now the Capitol is behind us, and in front of us is the National Monument. This is around 500 feet tall building.
It's officially 555 feet and 5 inches tall.
Oh.
And you can normally go up to the top. If you notice where we're standing now, there are 2 small squares at the top.
Yeah.
Those are the windows on the observation deck. Unfortunately, it is closed for at least the next 2 years while they renovate the inside and rebuild the elevator.
Oh, okay.
So it is an incredible view. If you haven't noticed, we don't have any skyscrapers in Washington, D.C.
Oh, that's right.
The tallest office building and apartment buildings are about 200 feet tall, so they're less than half as tall as the Washington Monument. And so when you get to the top, the views in all directions are quite incredible.
Oh, yeah.
The Washington Monument's actually closed twice in recent history. We had an earthquake in 2011, and there was pretty substantial earthquake damage to several buildings in Washington, D.C., most notably the Washington Monument. And so that was closed for several years while they did earthquake damage repair. And then it reopened. And then just earlier this year, they closed it down again because they were having a lot of problems with the elevator. And they chose a vendor to replace it and rebuild it. And that project is going to take another few years before it's
How old is it?
It opened in 1884.
Wow.
So it's definitely the oldest building on the National Mall.
There's a bit of a skyline back there.
Right, so what you're pointing to is Roslyn, Virginia, and because that is in...
that is not in D.C.
Right, so that's in the state of Virginia, and because Virginia, or Arlington, Virginia, does not have a Height Act like they do in the District of Columbia, they can build skyscrapers. And so none of those buildings are taller than the Washington Monument yet, but they are taller than they would be if they were here in D.C.
So I'm here for 3 days, including today. What would you recommend me to do in those 3 days?
Well, I definitely think you need to see at least 1 or 2 of the Smithsonian museums. I don't think there's one that's a particular must-see. I think it depends on your interests. So if you're an art lover, go see an art museum. If you don't care about it, don't go to one.
I like art, but I can see art so many other places in the world.
Exactly. So a unique museum would be the American History Museum, which you're probably not going to find anywhere else in the world. It's called the National Museum of American History. It traces the entire 200-some-year history of our country. One of my favorite exhibits is called the Star-Spangled Banner. That is the name of our national anthem, but it's actually what we call our flag. And the flag that's inside the museum is the flag that flew over Fort McHenry during the War of 1812, and that Francis Scott Key, when he saw it, was so inspired to see that the American flag was flying and that there wasn't a British flag flying over Fort McHenry that he felt inspired to write this poem that has become our national anthem. So you can see that original flag inside, and that's fantastic. But they've got plenty of other very, very interesting things in there as well.
I'll make sure not to kneel in front of it. That's what you say, no comment. There is much more coming from Washington, D.C. I will continue my tour with Rob from triphacksdc.com, and then I meet one of the many lobbyists that work here in the American Capitol. That episode will come out already in a few days. My name is Per Leboe. See ya.